Hi, I'm Marcus Coward, and this is Wake Up New Bedford, and I am here with Elliot Talley. Thanks for being here.
Thank you very much for inviting me.
Absolutely. And so, we were just talking about how you've been in newspapers, and you're very involved in your school, the community, and even the school committee.
Yes.
So, plenty of people know you, but for the people who don't know you, let's get to know you a little bit about, and you can start telling us about where you're from and a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, so if someone didn't know me, I'd tell them I'm Elliot Talley, and I was born in Florida. Although I don't have much connection there now, I was adopted out, but I still tell everybody that when they ask me where I'm from. But then I've been in New Bedford the rest of my life. I grew up musical. Although my parents weren't musicians, they instilled music in me, so I started taking piano lessons when I was 6, and I sang in my church choir. And then I kind of got thrust into the advocacy lens. First, my dad has always been involved in the Coalition for Social Justice, and I was at a rally with him to raise the minimum wage, as well as paid family medical leave when I was 7. So that's what started it.
Wow.
And then I kind of didn't do that for a little while. I got into high school, and there was a new policy on the bathrooms that I wasn't fond of. It was closing bathrooms and restricting the amount of time people can go to those bathrooms. And so I said, I don't like this. And I had a meeting with the principal, and we actually got some success. And I said, this is what I want to do. I ran for student council. I became the chair my freshman year. And ever since then, I've just been so into advocacy. So I became the chair of the Southeast region of Student Councils of Massachusetts, and I am now the communication coordinator for the statewide Student Advisory Council. And because I love this so much, I also joined the Association of Student Representatives, where we proposed bills to expand student representative voting rights on school committees. I served as Deputy Director of Legislative Affairs, and the work was just a lot of fun for me. And then in 2023, I got appointed to the steering committee of the Coalition for Social Justice. So this work has been expanding throughout my life.
And so, with all these positions, do you feel like they really go hand in hand and overlap, or is it kind of overwhelming at times?
I can say yes to both of those questions, right? A lot of these things are, they overlap. When you talk about music, I played piano at the inauguration of Bristol County Sheriff Paul Heroux. I also campaigned for him for a couple months. So it was really good to be able to work really hard in the campaign and then get to sit up on stage with all those really cool people and then play at the inauguration. And music has been used as an avenue for advocacy for a long time. So those do really tie in hand to hand. But I can also say there are times where it's overwhelming because I have many different things. I'm trying to get my teaching certification while also trying to represent the students. I'm trying to work on my conducting, work on my music. I'm having a senior recital, and I'm preparing music for that, but I'm also playing music in the pit for Cinderella the Musical at the high school. So there are a lot of things that do become a little overwhelming, but what helps me out is I keep a schedule, and I really try to just instill in myself, I can do this, I can get through this.
And so when you say teaching certificate, what does that mean? Or certification?
Yeah, well, that's slightly different than an actual, a teaching license. This is through the National Association of Music Teachers, and they basically just make sure that you kind of know what you're doing. They ask you a couple questions about your teaching philosophy. You have to play some pieces for them, and you have to take videos of you teaching your students. So I have a few students that take piano lessons from me, and so I'd like to get certified just to, partly to prove that I can do it, but also to help me refine my teaching abilities, because I know there's always areas I can improve, and I'd like to just keep improving myself every day.
And so is this just for teaching music or for different subjects?
Teaching music, but you get a focus in piano or flute or voice, so I am choosing piano.
Sure, okay. And is that the only instrument you're playing right now? I mean, and also singing. I mean, yeah, for sure.
I play the organ, I sing, I play piano. I on and off play guitar, and I no longer play the flute. But piano,
you put that in the past.
That one's in the past. I can say that piano is my favorite instrument to play, though.
Sure.
I love the piano.
Yeah. And so, rewinding a little bit, so when did you move from Florida to here in New Bedford?
I was just a few days old.
Okay,
so my parents had put me up for adoption before I was born.
Sure.
And my adoptive parents had already said, yes, I want this child. So all it took was waiting for them to be called. I had to stay in Florida for a few days just because of state law, and then I was out.
And so, what's the first school you remember going to?
The very first school was here at Betsy B. Winslow School.
You went to Winslow?
Yes.
Okay. And then where did you move on from there?
I went to Keith for 3 years,
Yeah.
and then I went on to New Bedford High School.
Yeah, okay. And so, what was the biggest takeaway after leaving Keith, let's say? From your teachers, from your students, like, once you left Keith, what was the mission? What was maybe one value you walked away with?
That's a good question. The Keith Middle School mascot is the Keith Captains.
Okay.
And captains are leaders. They want you to take ownership of your life and take ownership of your path forward. And that was something I definitely took coming out because, I wasn't always the best student, especially middle school. My grades weren't the greatest. My behavior definitely was not the greatest.
Really?
I know.
That's hard to believe.
I matured a lot the first year of high school when I started, and what I can also credit my advocacy, this leadership work has really matured me, and now I, act my age, right? But definitely coming out of high school, learning that I need to take ownership of what I do, including making sure my grades are up so I can get into college. My parents definitely instilled that in me. My mom is a college professor, right? And so they both were always telling me, but that was something I figured out through middle school, definitely.
Okay. And so, in middle school, I know you said that you got started with advocacy early. In middle school and high school, what was the first profession you felt like you could do or wanted to do, career-wise?
I'm going to start with elementary school. The first profession I ever wanted was to be a pilot. But then I went on a roller coaster and I was crying afterwards. My dad's like, "You're not going to be a pilot." I'm like, "Yeah, that makes sense." And then in 6th grade, I said I wanted to be an actuary. I wanted to be a mathematician. And none of my friends knew what that was, but I did. And then I grew up through that, and still, when I do go to college, I am planning on majoring in mathematics as well.
Really?
But I still love math, but the political aspect didn't come in until junior year. Every time people would say, "You should be a politician, you'll be a politician one day," I'm like, "No, I won't," right? I was like, I'm not gonna end up doing that. But now, the more I do it, it's like advocacy is what I feel happy doing. So I can say, although math has been a position I've been like, I want to do this my whole life, advocacy has now joined that.
So, talk to me about your love of math and what you see yourself doing with that degree.
That is a good question. There are definitely times when I think maybe I shouldn't do this because there are times where I'm not as good at math. I tested out of my Algebra 2 class, so I took pre-calculus as a sophomore.
Sure.
And it was a little discouraging at times because I wouldn't do as well as I had done before because it was a class 2 years ahead of me, and sometimes I was like, "Oh no, should I not do this?" But I kept sticking through it.
Good.
I can say math is fun because I have music and math. Music, there's no such thing as a right answer. You can make all these different melodies, and it's whatever makes you happy. But I also like a little bit of that reality, like, all right, there's one answer, 2 + 2 is 4, whether you like it or not. And so I've also been tutoring math. And I got to help teach a geometry class last year, which was so much fun. I have to say, I enjoyed it as much as, and it does help me really understand teachers. I've always loved and supported my teachers, but being in that room definitely made me support them a little more. And so that's really what brought the math to me.
Sure. And then, so do you see yourself, and going back to the math degree, do you see yourself being like a math professor or really just incorporating what you learn into whatever career you choose?
That's a really good question. So, math professor is a possibility. I have told people I won't teach because although I am teaching now, I'm like 2 hours a day, and that's enough for me. It takes a lot of patience, and I might have more when I get to that age, but just I don't think I have what it takes to be a teacher at this time.
Sure.
But what I will say is that at Northeastern, and shout out to Northeastern now, they have a combined major of mathematics and political science. So it combines, I know.
That's interesting. Okay.
It combines the two things that I find so exciting.
Yeah.
And so it's very statistical, and it looks at a lot of polling and a couple other things. It's hard for me to find enough information on the course to really sound like I know what I'm talking about.
No, but it sounds right up your alley, though.
Exactly. It's right up my alley. It's a very rare, and Emory University has it too, and I couldn't find any others in the United States that have it.
Wow.
And so with that, that's how I would incorporate it. I've thought about where I would work. I can work if I have mathematics and political science, I can work for the government in a lot of places. And although that doesn't pay well, I don't really care. I love people, and I've always said that in life I want to do whatever I can to help the people around me, but even the people I can't see. So it's going to be hard for me to figure that out, but I'm hoping.
And so where do you think you get that mentality from to want to help people?
Part of it is from my parents. My parents have, a lot of it, especially from my dad. My dad, with his work with the Coalition for Social Justice, I watch him. He fights for people that, he fights for things that don't affect him. And I gained that when I started advocating for students. I fight for them in a lot of things that don't really affect me, and I still love doing it. And we'll talk about the coalition again. I fought for minimum wage increases. That doesn't affect me because I have a salaried position right now as a music director. So I don't, but the minimum wage doesn't affect me, but it affects the people around me. So I should fight for it. There are many things with women's rights and LGBTQ plus rights, and while a lot of those things don't directly affect me, they affect the people around me. And the whole point of being a human is that you care for the people around you.
Sure, absolutely. And so, you being cognizant and aware of how your fellow peers and students are feeling and the issues that they are dealing with, is that something you've, since you were very young, like elementary school and middle school, have been aware of? Or is that something more so in high school that you started to really take into account?
Yeah, I can definitely say there were times where people in my life were like, you really need to understand how other people are feeling. You need to read people's emotions. And I've worked on that through elementary, middle school. And now that I'm in high school, I can definitely do that better. Yeah. I'm not the type of student that the majority of the people I represent are, because I'm part of the Academy of Honors. There's only 60 of us. There's still 60 of us per grade, right? There's still over 2,500 other students that I need to represent. So how do I get there? I'm friends with most of those students. Most of my friends are not in AP classes or doing the things that I do because, one, I just like hanging out with a diverse group of people, and there's, I love everybody, but also, I love to talk partly. But also, there's, you have to love everybody in your life, and definitely to help me understand what they need, I talk to them a lot. But I also started suggestion boxes. So I have people submit Google Forms to tell me, what do you find is an issue that you're facing, and how do you think I can solve it? And so I use that a lot, right?
Yeah,
and so,
that's very interesting.
Exactly. Well, in New Bedford, I use that a lot, but I've also used that statewide, right? I ask the student leaders across the state, what do you guys need from the state? And how can we push to make those changes? So when I was at the Association of Student Representatives, we filed a couple bills. In fact, I got to co-write a bill with a couple of my student representatives to allow students to vote on school committees, but also to expand CPR training in schools, first aid training in schools, universal free lunch, and free busing. So a lot of things that really touch students here, looking at how we can support them.
And so, at this point, you're a very extroverted person. Like you said, you like to talk, you do so many different things. Have you always been like that, or is this something you had to grow into?
When I was a kid, I was definitely described as shy when I was really, really young. And then I got a little too extroverted, and I was always like talking. In fact, in elementary school, I like to tell this story now, they had our report cards, and there was a part of the report card that said refrains from unnecessary talking. I always got a big unsatisfactory right there.
Really?
So but I've always been a people person. I became a little more introverted over COVID just because I wasn't seeing people, and I had to come back out of my shell, but I did, and now I'm back.
Thriving.
I'm back. That's right.
Okay. And so, talking about advocacy, what would you say is the biggest challenge? Because you're able to get a lot done, but is it finding the ideas? Is it mustering up the courage in order to talk to the person in charge? What for you is the biggest challenge when it comes to advocacy?
That is a really good question because there are a lot of challenges, So I'll lay out some of the challenges I
Please.
face now.
Please.
Right, me being young, that is definitely an issue because
Okay.
people are like, you don't know what you're talking about, you're 17. But when I started this, I was 14. And so people really didn't want to listen to me. And the only way they have started doing that now is they've seen me work over the past couple of years. They're
Sure.
like, fine, we can listen to him. So that was one of the big things. Part of it is getting the ideas. Sometimes people aren't quite sure what they want. And it's hard for them to explain it to me. So part of how I've tried to work on that is giving them, I used to just be an open-ended question. What do you want, right? And that's sometimes a little too much. But if you say, here are some 5 things we're looking at, what do you want? And then they're able to tell me a little more of what they want. Courage has definitely been a big thing. I definitely get some backlash from some of the things I have to say, but I have to, right? But it's like,
I respect it.
Yeah, but but it's like I have to do what I have to do. That one's scary. I guess I'd say the biggest challenge is getting other people to help you out. I can say, as much as I love doing my job, I can't do it alone. Nobody's perfect, and I have flaws, and I need other people there to help me work on that. And sometimes people are like, well, Elliot, you got it. You'll be fine. And it's like, maybe, but I want to make sure I'm doing the best job I can. And the only way is if I have that constructive criticism first, but also I need you guys there helping me, right?
Yeah.
When we would have state meetings, there would be people who kind of wouldn't do their work on the research, and they'll be left to me. Definitely my first year that I chaired the Student Advisory Council, I was doing a lot of the grunt work at pushing things forward because it was the year I had to reform the council because it was moving a little wonky and they weren't fully listening to the student body's needs. They didn't have suggestion boxes or anything. So my biggest reform was actually becoming a student advisory council. And that took a lot of work. And so getting other people to really get in gear and help you out, get out and knock on doors if we're campaigning for something, or help me write this legislation, or help me lobby for this legislation. That's kind of the biggest challenge that I face.
Great answer. So you have done so much with the Student Advisory Council in the last few years in terms of reforming it, restructuring it. Do you feel like it will be left in good, responsible hands once you now have to graduate?
Yes. This is gonna first sound like a brag. I promise you it's not supposed to be.
Go ahead.
But I have enough pull at the high school that I've been training people to take over my role, especially you interviewed Mark Dressel before.
Yes,
I want him to take over for me.
Sure.
So
okay.
I've been training him. I've been showing him. I have a big binder that's this big that I use to help me out.
Wow.
It has personnel reports, finance reports, everything you need because all my arguments need to be based in fact.
Okay.
And so I've been training him how to do it. And part of it is name recognition. A lot of people know him, but a lot of people know me, right? I got 900 votes. The last election, which is the most that a student advisory council person's gotten in history.
Wow.
And so I'm going to try to use that to give those votes to someone else so that they stay in good hands. Because I've done all this work, and it took me 3 years to get us here. It takes a couple months to bring us right back.
Wow.
And so part of my job is to put us in a good position. I can say that there are times where I definitely failed in my responsibility to train somebody else and get the right person. I like to say I'm not a dictator, I'm going to leave, right? There are many associations that I've either chaired or been leadership of where I brought it out of its issues and then I said, all right, I'm going to step back from leadership and let someone else take over because I don't need to be in charge of everything, and I just let them elect someone else, and then it kind of went back to its old ways.
Yeah.
And I definitely can say that's part of, I dropped the ball, I admit, and part of what I should be doing.
You take the blame for that?
A little bit, because the status quo is what people get taught by the people who have been there a long time. And when you're there changing things, you have to show them, here's what I did, here's where we were, here's why I did what I did. Please don't go back to where we were before.
Sure,
and so
sure.
I would like to say I don't fully want to accept all the blame, but I will take some of it.
Sure.
Part of it is, they have to really know who they're electing to replace somebody, but I should be working with potential replacements to train them. The reason I didn't do it is because I didn't want it to seem like there was a puppet in the next role, like the next person was just an extension of me that was whispering in their ear. So I wanted it to be someone completely that I didn't coach at all.
Yeah, I understand
but
that.
then I realized that I can coach them and they can take it or leave it, but at least use my advice to do the right thing.
Yeah, and give them some structure to know like what it took for you to get there.
Exactly.
No, I totally know what you mean. But that's a fine line for them not to feel or even look like a puppet, but then you to pass on the knowledge that you
Exactly.
have, because you have
Yeah.
clearly a lot, that
Thank
made you
you.
successful. I mean, especially in the votes,
Yeah.
show it. I mean, the most students ever in New
Yeah.
Bedford High history. So can you talk a little bit about the difference between the Student Advisory Council and then student class presidents, right?
Yes.
Okay.
That's a big one. People don't understand. So Student
Yeah.
Advisory Council is actually set up by state law since 1971. Every single high school, remember that high schools that don't have one, every single high school is required to have a Student Advisory Council of at least 5 members that
Is it just public high schools or like private too? Or are we probably just talking about public high schools?
Well, that one, it's kind of unclear at this point because I've talked to people at the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education, and they all have different answers for me. And I've needed that answer just for me to figure out a couple things with setting up our councils.
Yeah.
And I haven't gotten a definitive answer, but I'm going to assume that it is public high schools because
Sure.
that's what we have the most control over.
Sure.
But at least every public high school is supposed to have a student advisory council that one meets with the principal, but they also should be meeting with the school committee, and the chair of that student advisory council is a member of the school committee just without the right to vote.
Sure.
And so that's a big thing that's state law, and then the school handbook sets up class presidents. So what we do at Student Advisory Council is we advise the district and school administration on what they should be doing to best support the students. And then the class presidents, they do a lot of fundraising. So here's how we can have a good prom, here's how we can do other good stuff. And I know that sounds like, but they also do a lot of the student engagement. They get students to feel proud to be at their school,
Sure.
right? And so they'll have pep rallies, they'll have spirit weeks, they'll have spring flings, they'll have money wars, right?
Sure.
And part of it is the fundraising, but part of it is getting students engaged.
Sure.
And I can say ever since I took over, I've made sure that the Student Advisory Council has a little bit of say in engaging students as well. And so actually last year we took on a project of trying to increase the numbers of people enrolled in sports and clubs at the high school.
Okay.
Because it was about 10% of students in the high school were enrolled in a sport, which is,
That's low.
That's low.
Yeah,
and
yeah.
the athletic director told us that number, and we said, let's work with you. We're going to
Yeah.
get this done. And we've seen a little bit of progress there. So,
Love to see
yeah.
it. Okay. Great. I'm really thankful for that explanation too, because I didn't go to a public high school. So when I was talking to Mark, the Student Advisory Council was definitely new. And then we just had just a school government of like each class had a representative and there was a school president. But I really appreciate how there's a Student Advisory Council in place in order to make the big changes and to have that form of communication, that
Yeah.
line of communication between the principal and then even state, and like the school committee.
Yeah.
So very important. And so how do you feel about the attitude of the students right now, if you were to describe it?
The attitude of the students.
Yes.
So, yeah, I definitely say that the students and I don't always fully agree on things, but I'm willing to put aside my personal preferences to represent the students.
Okay.
So, I mean, for instance, when we were pushing to end the school day earlier at 2:12 instead of 2:40, I was actually not in support of that, but I supported it publicly because the students wanted it, and so I said, okay, let's do it, right? And there are times when there's that mediation between the students and the admins because the students don't get to hear what the admins hear, and so I get meetings with the principal, I get meetings with students, and so I'm always kind of right in the middle because I've heard both sides,
Yeah.
and I'm forged right in the middle.
Sure.
But part of it is that transparency from admin that would change student attitudes because the students got to hear what I'm hearing. Here's why administrators want to do this. Here's why this is happening. Maybe they'd be less upset about certain changes. I can definitely say there's a new phone policy that should be coming into place. And I'm going to say this here because it was said at a school committee meeting. They are planning on having yonder pouches, which will be locking up students' phones during the day. I can say that the principal, when she was thinking about doing that policy last April, and I commend her for doing this. She called me out of my class, invited me down to her office, and I sat in her office for almost an hour discussing that policy as well as other policies that the school was looking at. But I felt that was really nice of her, and
Yeah.
that's exactly how this should be.
Sure.
And I have said to them, great, you said this to me. now go say this to my students, right?
Sure, okay.
Because it doesn't, coming from me, they're like, are you sure that's right? I'm like, well, you know. And so it needs to come from admin because
Yeah.
I also don't want to just go around saying things because what if I say it wrong or it's untrue and then that starts a rumor? I don't need to start chaos with my job.
Sure, yeah,
So I like to keep it a little more low key from my end, but the student attitudes, they do get annoyed sometimes because they don't know why this policy is in place or why it's still in place. There's also the bathroom policy where certain bathrooms are closed at certain times, and there's that time frame, and students will say, administration did at first say, there's a lot of vaping in the bathrooms and a lot of skipping, but now we have increased amount of security guards to make sure that that isn't happening. And we have vape detectors in all the bathrooms. So the renewed question is, all right, we have these two solutions to the problems you highlighted.
Yeah.
Why is the policy still the same? And so that needs to be answered to the students so that they're not as upset as they can get.
Sure. So transparency. Yeah. And so do you feel like the school committee has proven to be transparent as well in your position with them?
Yeah, the school committee actually doesn't, when I tell them something's happening, they're like, what? A lot of times they also don't get as much information as I'd think they would. And so they have been transparent with me about their votes, and even I've called school committee members, and when I've talked about things, if they don't support something that I support, they'll generally let me know, and that's really good. And so I think the school committee is doing a good job of transparency. Yeah.
Sure. And so do you feel like Mark is at this point ready to take it on? Or if there was one piece of advice that you could tell him to really work on? And it doesn't, I mean, it is Mark that we're talking about, but if it was anyone, like what would be the number one thing you'd want the person in charge as a student to focus on?
I can say definitely that Mark is ready. I've been showing him the ropes for a long time, and I think he is ready to take over. I still have some more things I'd like to show him, but I think he's ready. I can say pieces of advice.
Yeah.
You are the representative of the students, and students are a very diverse group of people. You can't get everybody to agree with you with the student body. You need to understand that not everybody's going to agree with you. I can say that about 90% of the students are like agreeing with me, but there's still that 10% that I still represent. They still elected me to represent them, and I have to represent them too.
Yeah.
But part of it is explaining to them, here's what like all of your classmates are saying, and you're this one person, here's why I can't take your position. As well as my very first year, I would take things from parents and bring them to the principal. The principal said, you represent the students, the parents should not be part of this. And so I had to take that to heart, and that's definitely something. There have been times where I've gone to school committee meetings, and I've left, and I've had teachers come up to me and like, what did you say at school committee? Or even admin say, what did you say at school committee? And part of what I say to them is, I represent the students feel this, I have to share this, that's my job, I love you, but this is my job, right? And so
don't
part
take
of
it
that,
personally.
exactly, don't take it personally, I'm just doing my job because they know they have my utmost respect. And I say hi to them in the hallways, I always shake their hands, and I'm always willing to talk, but at the end of the day, we represent students, and they have to come first in our considerations.
So I'd love to end there on part one, and then so we're just going to continue this conversation in part two.
Of course.
Thank you everyone for watching. This has been Wake Up New Bedford with Elliot Talley. We've talked a little bit about how he got to this point with being involved with the Student Advisory Council along with so many other things. And we're going to continue to talk about his role on the school committee, talk about how he's formed legislation, and see about his plans for the future. Thank you everyone for watching. Catch us in part two. Peace.